Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this exciting event. My name is Alfonso David. I am the president of the Human Rights Campaign, the nation's largest lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer civil rights organization. It is my privilege to be here tonight representing more than 3 million members and supporters from across the country. Before we begin tonight, I would first like to thank Vice President Biden, Dr. Biden, and the entire Biden campaign for making tonight possible. I would also like to thank our board of directors, our board of governors, and the incredible team of dedicated professionals at the Human Rights Campaign who work day in and day out to push for equality. 180 days. It all happens in 180 days. That is how many days we have until the most consequential election of our lifetime. That is how many days we have to take our country back, and the stakes could not be higher. Over the past 3.5 years, we have witnessed an onslaught of attacks on our Constitution and the Bill of Rights by a president who has never read either of them. From day one, Donald Trump has chipped away at the principles that have guided this nation since its founding. And in this moment, we must be the change that our country needs right now. We are not simply fighting to remove Donald Trump from office. We are fighting to ensure that we are all treated with the dignity and respect that we all deserve under law, regardless of our sexual orientation or gender identity or race or sex or ethnicity or national origin or zip code. We must stand up. We must organize. We must fight back for a democracy that works and a democracy that protects all of us. That is why, on behalf of the Human Rights Campaign and our more than 3 million members and supporters, it is my honor to announce the endorsement of Joe Biden for President of the United States. Vice President Biden has devoted his life to public service. Throughout his career, he has been an unwavering supporter of LGBTQ equality. In fact, it was 8 years ago today, in the midst of a contentious re-election campaign, that Vice President Biden endorsed marriage equality on NBC's Meet the Press. That moment in 2012 marked a major turning point for LGBTQ rights, contributing to a sea change in public opinion that ultimately culminated with the Supreme Court ruling that made marriage equality the law of the land. Vice President Biden was also ahead of the curve on expanding protections and rights for transgender individuals. In 2012, he called transgender rights the civil rights issue of our time, articulating a truth that many, even in his own party at the time, left unaddressed. This year, in the midst of a primary campaign that saw the strongest field of pro-equality candidates in our nation's history, Vice President Biden has been a consistent and vocal supporter of LGBTQ equality, including at the historic presidential town hall we hosted last year with CNN. At the Human Rights Campaign, we fight every day to combat the discrimination and harassment and violence that LGBTQ people face in their daily lives. We know that Joe Biden will be the president who stands up for all of us, because that is exactly what he has done year after year. So as we work to turn out the more than 57 million equality voters and allies that the Human Rights Campaign has identified, we are confident that Joe Biden will protect and advance individual rights. His dedication to advancing LGBTQ equality, even when it was unpopular to do so, has pushed our country and our movement forward. And as president, we know that that is the same dedication he will bring to push us ever closer to full equality. Mr. Vice President, we are proud to support you in this race, and I promise you that we will work day in and day out to ensure that you are elected the next president of the United States.
I'm really proud, Alfonso, to accept the endorsement. I really mean it. And I want to say hi to everyone. It's been great to be connected with all of you, and I'm looking forward to our conversation. And I want to thank you for taking the time to speak with me today. And look, I want to give special thanks to you, Alfonso, for you're a trailblazing president, man. You brought on not only exceptional leadership, you have deep experience and legal savvy, and to this really vital role you're going to be playing in the next, well, from this point on. You've been doing it. And I want to tell you how grateful I am for your endorsement. I really mean it. These issues are personal for me. They run deep in my family. My son, Bo, I don't have time to tell, but I'm going to brag about him. My deceased son, Bo, was the Attorney General. He made incredible strides to help children who were being abused, particularly gay and lesbian and transgender children. As Attorney General, he passed the first transgender right law in the state of Delaware, standing up against discrimination, standing against hate. And after Bo passed, we wanted to further his legacy. So we launched a campaign called As You Are, to raise awareness about how critical family acceptance is in the lives of LGBTQ youth. So that this endorsement truly means a great deal to me, to my family, to my daughter and son, my other living son, who are deeply involved as well. I'm excited to stand alongside y'all for this fight ahead, because I know these are anxious and difficult times for our communities, for our nation, and quite frankly, for the world. And I hope that all of you and your families are staying safe and healthy as we take this on. But, as we work to stem the immediate health crisis and the financial crisis, I think it's really essentially critical that we not lose sight of the civil rights battles we're still fighting. And for more than 3 years, Donald Trump has tried to roll back the protections for the community. He denied access for critical health care, denying transgender Americans the opportunity to serve our country after we had established they can, enabling adoption agencies, homeless shelters, and other essential services to engage in discrimination, turning a blind eye to violence, giving harbor to hateful voices, giving them a chance, they're in any question that they're going to use this crisis to try to further divide and attack our community, even more than they have. The White House shouldn't be a source of oppression and fear. It should be a source of moral courage. And now I'll admit, 8 years ago today, when I went on Meet the Press, I was asked how I felt about marriage equality. I wasn't thinking about moral courage. I was just thinking about an honest answer. And that's my problem. No one ever doubts I say what I mean. The problem is I sometimes say all that I mean. The issue. So when I endorsed marriage equality, some people were saying, well, what the hell's Biden doing? But the American people I knew at the time were with us. When I walked in on that Monday after Meet the Press, Barack got up from his desk, the president of the government came over and gave me a big hug. He said, you told me you weren't going to remain quiet. I'm proud of you. And the fact is that I made a bet then. The American people already were ahead of their leaders. They were ahead of us. They were ahead of everybody. And I just knew it. We hadn't polled on it. We polled later that I think it was that week or next 2 weeks, and well over 50% of the American people already were there. And 3 years later, thanks to the courageous leadership of the Human Rights Campaign and so many countless others, marriage equality became the law of the land. And all I did was speak from the heart and acknowledge and elevate extraordinary work this movement had put in to win the hearts and change minds a long time ago. Look, this moment, the moment that shed blood on Christopher Steele, that took a million steps forward in living rooms and at kitchen tables, each time a person summoned the courage to live their truth. This moment deserves a partner in the White House who will stand beside you, amplify you, fight for you, not as an act of courage, but as a reflex. The courage and determination of the LGBTQ community and movement is one of the most astonishing moral forces in modern American history. The fight for American equality was incredible to behold, but we're going to need the same force and the same drive, the same conviction to win the battles ahead of us. Protecting our LGBTQ youth, winning full rights for the trans community, passing the Equality Act, guarding the rights of the LGBTQ workers, regardless of what the Supreme Court has to say about Xandra and Bostic, and nothing about this will be easy. But I am absolutely convinced I've been a friend of HRC for a long time, and I'm convinced the American people are with us. I've seen firsthand the incredible capacity to win some of these battles and soften impenetrable hearts. And together, I know we're going to do it. We're going to make extraordinary progress on the issues that matter the most. So I want to thank you all again for your leadership, for your courage, and the way you've inspired others, and for the way you've inspired me. I'm excited to come together to further the legacy of my son, Bo, and further the essential work of this movement. And so, I'm proud to stand with you. I really am. I'm still prouder to stand that you've chosen to stand with me. And I want to thank you for leading the way. And we can't forget, what I did 8 years ago took no courage. What took courage was 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago, when people had the courage to stand up and speak out. They not only risked their jobs and lost their jobs and were excoriated, but some of them were physically took physical courage, and some were killed. So we owe a lot to those generations that preceded us. That's what got us here. But I look forward to this conversation. I'm sorry to get so engaged, but it really, really matters. It really does. It matters for my grandchildren. It matters for my great-grandchildren. It matters for this country. It's who we are. It's about who we are.
Well, Vice President, one of the things we love about your advocacy and your time in public service is, again, your candor and your tenacity in addressing issues that face marginalized communities, including the LGBTQ community. And you referenced this in your opening remarks, the Equality Act. Now, LGBTQ people still face discrimination in many parts of this country. The majority of the states have no laws protecting LGBTQ people from being fired from their jobs or being evicted from their homes. The Equality Act, as you know, would end this patchwork of state laws by prohibiting discrimination at the federal level. Now, this bill passed in the House of Representatives last year, but Senator Mitch McConnell has refused to allow a vote in the Senate. So as someone who has played such a key role in helping to repeal Don't Ask, Don't Tell and passing the Matthew Shepard and James Beard Crime Prevention Act, what would you do to ensure that the Equality Act actually becomes law of the land?
Well, first of all, as you stated, the majority of states across the country, you can marry a person you love on Saturday and get fired for the same reason on Monday. And I'm convinced, as I was when I spoke out on Meet the Press 8 years ago, the American people don't know this. They're unaware of it, and they don't support it. It's critical that the president make it clear that this discrimination exists, that we still face discrimination in almost every part of life: employment, housing, healthcare, military service, starting a family, even in getting a driver's license where you're right with your, and they have to deal with your quote, right gender marker. Come on. It's unacceptable morally and legally. So I think enacting the Equality Act will be one of the top priorities I have, but it's important. It's an important step. Look, it makes clear that existing civil rights law ban discrimination based on gender or sexual orientation, period. No more landlords refusing tenants, no more schools ignoring harassment, no more employees firing people just because of who they are. 9 out of 10 Americans think that firing someone for their sexual orientation is wrong. Now we say, well, why hadn't it changed? Well, guess what? The House passed the Equality Act last year. Mitch McConnell has left it to die on his desk and won't even let it get to committee, because part of the reason is, as president, I'm going to speak out to the American people and say, do you realize? I'll bet when you talk to people that you don't know well, and you say, by the way, do you know that I'm allowed to get married on Saturday, but I can walk into my place of employment in the following 30-some states and I can get fired? They're going to look at you. They don't know that. The vast majority of people do not know that. And you and I in our private conversations, I said, I think what we have to do is keep banging and banging and banging away the American people that this exists, that it exists in the law in so many states. And as president, I'm going to make passing it a top priority in my first 100 days. because it's about who we are. Look, what's more, on day one, I'll reinstate so many of the other anti-discrimination measures that the LGBTQ community that Trump has shredded. I'm going to direct the Defense Department to let transgender service members serve openly and free from discrimination in the military. They can shoot as straight as anybody else can shoot, number one. Two, stop schools from discriminating against LGBTQ students. Prohibit discrimination against transgender people in federally funded homeless shelters. That's what this guy's done. Come on, think of that. Right now, in the middle of this COVID-19 virus, homeless people, if in fact you are LGBTQ, you can be denied access to a federally funded shelter. What is this all about? The American people don't know it. I think part of it is just making it clear and making it absolutely clear to everyone that that's what the law is and it must be changed, and put enormous pressure on McConnell and the rest of his Republican colleagues. With a little bit of luck, by the way, I'm going to get elected, and a little bit more luck, we're going to win back the United States Senate and get this done. And it will be a very happy day, not only here, but around the world. You may remember in our administration, we spoke out about the discrimination against LGBTQ folks around the world. We threatened to withhold aid. And this is important. This is a basic, fundamental human right.
Yes, indeed. And, you referenced this in your remarks also a few minutes ago about COVID-19. COVID-19, as you know, has changed our lives. It's changed how we work. It's changed how we interact with each other. And it's also reminded all of us, of all political persuasions, how important affordable healthcare is in our daily lives.
Absolutely.
So research, as you know, shows that this virus is having a disproportionate negative impact on people of color and on LGBTQ people. Biases and prejudices are being compounded for people who are unemployed, those who are living with HIV, seniors, hourly wage workers, healthcare workers, and those that are living with chronic conditions. So for LGBTQ people who are living at the intersections of so many of these identities, how would you help to ensure that every person in this country has access to affordable healthcare?
Well, before I even answer, let me just point out, when somebody is in trouble, when they need to get access to food, when they have to get to the hospital, when they are looking for a first responder to get them there, when they are in a operating room and a nurse and a doctor is trying to take care of them and risking their lives. Does anybody ask, by the way, is the person taking care of me? Are they gay? Are they lesbian? Are they queer? Are they transgender? No. And they don't ask that because they know they need help. And so many people are risking their lives in this community to help other people in this crisis. Look, Obamacare was a big deal, especially for LGBTQ Americans. It stopped insurance companies from charging you just because of your gender, your sexual orientation, or identity, or HIV status. Stopped them from charging you more. It's the first time we enshrined in law the belief that everyone should have access to affordable, quality care, no matter their race, their gender, their identity, their sexual orientation. Now, Trump has been trying to gut these protections since he took office. So anyone involved in patient care, from the board of directors to the receptionist in charge of scheduling, could put their beliefs above your health care and deny your care based on your sexual orientation. And now he's literally in court trying to gut the whole law and strip millions of health insurers in the midst of health insurance in the midst of this global pandemic. As president, I'm going to protect and build on Obamacare with a public option. That's the fastest way to get to universal coverage. Reverse Trump's actions and restore Obamacare protections for LGBTQ Americans. And prep so that people at high risk of getting AIDS, HIV/AIDS, don't have to choose between paying their rent and staying alive. And make sure insurance companies treat gender confirmation surgery as a medical necessity, which it is. Revoke Trump's restrictions on Title X, which harms so many healthcare centers like Planned Parenthood that provide quality care for LGBTQ communities and Americans. There's so much we can turn around by executive order, but so much more we have to do by legislative action. And so I think we can do it. We just have to keep at it. We have to make it clear and talk about it.
Now, you have spent so much time, as I mentioned before, in public service. You have been in the legislative branch, you have been in the executive branch, but there is one branch that has played a central role as well in advancing LGBTQ equality and protecting marginalized communities, and that is the judiciary. So the court will soon rule on the question of whether discrimination against LGBTQ people violates federal law under Title VII. This question has been answered in the affirmative by many federal courts, and we now wait a ruling from the Supreme Court. So can you tell us how you plan to ensure that the Supreme Court not only reflects our values of inclusion, but also the demographic of this nation?
Well, yes, look, Title VII of the Civil Rights Act bars discrimination in employment, housing, healthcare, military service, starting a family, or even just getting a driver's license with your right gender marker. The Trump administration is arguing before the Supreme Court that it doesn't cover that. We need justice who will support civil rights protections and defend people's rights to be themselves. I'm going to appoint pro-equality judges who defend the rights and the rights that are in the Constitution. Judges who commit to the rule of law, to civil rights and civil liberties, who come from a diverse set of backgrounds and actually look like America. You know, I'm going to make sure that we start by reversing the damage Donald Trump has done to the federal bench. And by the way, what's one of the overwhelming reasons why we have to win this election? 4 more years of Donald Trump and a Republican Senate being able to choose our judges is presidents are going to come and go, but those courts will stay for a generation. He's already appointed a quarter of all federal appeals court judges. Their average age is less than 50, meaning they'll have a say over our lives for decades. We can't afford any more. But to get the appointments through, we also have to win the United States Senate in November. And I'm going to fight like hell to make that happen. I got criticized for saying I'm going to campaign in states that maybe it's going to be hard for me to win. I think I can win them, like North Carolina, Georgia, Florida, even in Texas. But I'm going to spend my life campaigning for other Democrats. In 2018, I campaigned in 24 states for over 65 candidates to help them win back the House. This year, I'm going to do the same thing to compete in every corner of the country to make sure we get the Congress we need and get the courts we deserve. We have to win back the Senate, the single most consequential thing we can do beyond getting Donald Trump out of office. And we can do it with your help.
So you've raised an important point, and that is voting. We all know that we have the constitutional right to vote, but unfortunately, in many cases, it is suppressed. And COVID-19 has certainly sparked a lot of conversations about vote by mail. We should make it easier, not harder, to vote. Voter suppression, as you know, impacts LGBTQ people. It impacts people of color. As an example, a transgender woman may be turned away from voting because she's unable to get her name changed legally in the state where she lives. So these types of challenges are often compounded for people in certain parts of this country where government officials are actually enforcing suppression laws. The Human Rights Campaign has been working to combat voter suppression efforts. I want to ask you, as you talk about campaigning for candidates throughout the country, what would you do as president to guarantee that everyone can fully exercise their constitutional right to vote?
Look, throughout our history, we've held elections in hard times. In the midst of the Civil War, 2 world wars, the 1918 flu pandemic, and we're going to do it again this year. We can protect our democracy and public health at the same time. But, it's a big but, we have to listen to the public health experts and figure out now, as a nation, how we can conduct a full, fair, and safe vote in November. Now, I've been meeting with the civil rights leaders across the country as to what we should be doing. The Wisconsin primary recently that we just saw sent up a giant warning flare. Republicans trying to force in-person voting to suppress turnout no matter the health cost. To be clear, no one should have to risk their lives to cast a ballot. We need to provide every citizen every opportunity to exercise their right to vote, in person and by mail. With the right support, state and local election officials can get this done. But Congress has to do its part. They have to do its part to get the funding they need. Trump's already trying to undermine trust with false claims of voter fraud, threatening to block COVID assistance if extra funds go to the Postal Service, which may be the key to mail. I mean, he's talking about cutting off the Postal Service. I mean, my Lord. But let's be real. This crisis presents an unprecedented challenge. But voting rights have been under assault since the Supreme Court's 2013 decision in Shelby versus Holder, which gutted voter protections and pre-clearance. And today, 34 states have voter ID laws like the ones you mentioned, and a third of transgender people don't have government IDs because it's so hard to get that ID to show their true gender marker. Look, and if you have to, if you have a government ID, registering to vote is a separate challenge if you don't have one, since most registration forms only go to two gender options. And if they make it to the polls, many are turned away by workers who question if they are who they say they are. As a result, a majority of transgender people never vote. That's just dead wrong. As president, I'm going to restore the full Voting Rights Act. By the way, it got, in the Holder case, it got a big chunk got wiped out. Support automatic same-day voter registration. Appoint an attorney general who views it as a priority, like Eric Holder did, to challenge voter suppression laws. Support state and federal efforts to let transgender and gender nonconforming individuals select X as a gender marker on their government ID and passports and other documents. Make it crystal clear to foreign governments that there will be a steep price to pay for interfering in our elections. We can do this. We can do this. And Amy Klobuchar is one of the leading efforts in the United States Senate to provide for the money and the means by which we can have early voting. For example, one of the ways to make sure you could have in-person voting is to have early voting starting 20 days before the election period so you can space out in a sanitary way. You can scrub down the machines. You can move to paper ballots. You don't have to be in a situation where you're touching a screen, but it costs money. It costs money to do that. And we have to make sure that everyone who wants to vote by mail has a stamped, self-addressed envelope back to the polling place to say, this is my vote, and it counts. There's so many things we can do, but the Congress has to be able to pass the laws that provide the money for the states to do it. And we have Republican, in those states that are vote by mail, two of them are predominant Republican states like Utah. And so it can be done. But we've got to keep it up now. And that's why I can't thank you all enough for keeping the drumbeat up. You got 30 million people. Talk about it. Talk about it. Talk about it. Because as Trump said, when the Congress put money in the first CARES Act, he said, I'm not for any of that. And the reason I'm not is because if we allow vote by mail like that and we pay for it, guess what? We're never elect another Republican. Well, a lot of Republicans don't think that, but they sure wouldn't elect him.
That's for sure. Now, I want to just continue this strand with respect to issues affecting the trans community. We certainly talked about voting challenges, but there's also a spat of violence. In 2019, as you may know, at least 26 transgender or gender nonconforming people in this country were killed, the majority of whom were Black transgender women. And in 2020, this year, at least 10 transgender or gender nonconforming people have been killed so far. So this is a crisis by any objective standard. This is a crisis that demands national attention. But yet too often, this crisis has been brushed aside by lawmakers and ignored by the press. So what would you do, in addition to addressing the voting rights issue, what would you do to address the epidemic of violence that is facing so many transgender people of color in this country?
It is an epidemic. As I pointed out before and during Trump's administration, There's been a surge of hate crimes, 18% of them against LGBTQ people. And there's been an epidemic of violence against trans women, particularly trans women of color. At least 26 transgender or gender nonconforming individuals, you point out, have been violently killed in 2019. And a majority were Black transgender women. Hatred and bigotry weren't born when Donald Trump took office. But let's be clear, he's giving it safe harbor. As I said when I announced, we're in a battle for the soul of this nation. The words of a president matter. No matter who the president is, we each have a responsibility to declare with conviction, hatred and bigotry have no place in America. And as president, I will tackle this deadly combination of sexism, homophobia, and racism that's behind these murders. Get deadly weapons out of dangerous hands, ban assault weapons and high-capacity magazines, expand background checks, fight the discrimination that looks to so many transgender women and puts them out of economic opportunities, job training, housing, trapping them in environments where they're much more likely to face violence. Protect transgender kids from harassment and assault at school so they have the same solid start in life. Look, Trump rolled back protections. I'm going to issue new guidance to make sure schools investigate abuse. And I will reauthorize the Violence Against Women Act. Passing the Violence Against Women Act in 94 was one of the proudest accomplishments, and it transformed the way this country gets survivors to the support and justice they deserve. But I'm even prouder of every time we've since reauthorized that law to make it stronger and more inclusive. And in 2013, we made sure that it protected LGBTQ survivors and kept them from being denied access to services like housing. Today, Mitch McConnell is refusing to bring that act up for reauthorization. It's been there for almost a year. He hadn't even brought it up for a vote. We have a crisis and we need to act, but we have to keep reminding people of what the Republicans are doing and what McConnell is doing. He is deliberately standing in the way of allowing people to have a fair chance in life. You know, my dad used to have an expression. He said, Joey, everybody deserves to be treated with respect. Everybody deserves to be treated with honor. And this is the exact opposite. This president has done nothing but stir up. You know, I used to think that you could, once you defeat it in a piece of legislation like we did in the Civil Rights Act when I was a young senator and coming up, I thought, well, you know what? We can actually eliminate racism and hatred. But we can't. It just hides. It hides under a rock and until a president comes along and breathes oxygen into it and then gives it legitimacy. We have to act in a way that makes it clear to our children. Our children are listening. All our children are listening. We have to speak out. We have to keep talking about it. And everybody has to act. Everybody has to act. And I'm going to make sure that I keep that drum beat up.
Mr. Vice President, why don't we talk a little bit more about children? Because you're right. We have to protect our young people. And growing up is hard, as we all know. I can only
imagine.
But it is harder for young people who are LGBTQ. They're often bullied either at school and in some cases by family members. And they are at greater risk of being homeless or harming themselves or even committing suicide. These are vulnerable kids and they need our empathy and they need our help. So what would you do in addition to what you've just listed a few minutes ago to ensure that schools and communities are welcoming of all LGBTQ youth?
Let me start off by saying that you said it's hard growing up as a kid. It's hard under any circumstance. And it's hard if you have anything that is viewed as different from what people are used to. I grew up as a kid, I used to stutter. I learned about bullies really early on. And that's why I'm not worried about having to deal with the man in the White House. Yeah, no, I really mean it. Not a joke. Because, you know, when you're a kid, you talk like that. Everybody can, you know, if I said I had a cleft palate when I was a kid or a withered arm or a club foot, no one would laugh about it. But they can even still laugh about stuff. It's not comparable. But my point is, it's really hard if you have any serious thing that makes you look different than everybody else. And discrimination, bullying, and harassment can have a devastating impact. The LGBTQ high schoolers are almost 5 times more likely to attempt suicide, twice as likely to be homeless, twice as likely to suffer mental health conditions as an adult. We have to fight for our kids. And they're our kids. They're all our kids, not somebody else's kids. They're our kids. They're the kite strings that lift our national ambitions aloft. We have to fight for them every step of the way. We have to make sure the kids are accepted by their families and their guardians. I wish I had time to sit down, because I have sat down with members of the community and privately here in Delaware and around the country. And I asked them, what was it like as a kid? What happened when you realized you were, quote, different? What'd your mom say? What'd your dad say? What'd your brothers or sisters say? I'll never forget, I'll go all the way back when this was an epiphany for me of sorts, back when Governor Cuomo, the first Governor Cuomo, Mario Cuomo, was running, and he was doing a town meeting, or I guess it was a debate. I was watching it on television. And a guy stood up, and it was a bleacher situation on a stage with an audience in front. And if my memory serves me correctly, this guy said something to the effect, I understand you're soft on queers, or some phrase like that, some derogatory phrase. And he said, I think there's no difference. And he said, well, I tell you what would you do if your son told you he was gay? He said, I'd embrace him, and I'd hug him, and I'd love him. And I'll never forget that. At that time, when he said that, back in the 80s, it was viewed as like, wow, did he just say that? Did he just say that? And I was dumbfounded when I realized a lot of people who were for him, a lot of people who don't think themselves prejudiced, would think the same way about their child. If their child came and said, you know, I'm trans, or I'm a lesbian, I'm queer, I'm gay. I mean, and it just stunned me. And so when my son, as the Attorney General, we started a foundation for him to help LGBTQ kids who are abused. And as president, here's what I'll do. I'm going to pass and sign the Equality Act, protecting sexual orientation and gender identity under the Civil Rights Act, so our LGBT plus kids have every opportunity in life that other kids have. Restore the protection for LGBTQ kids in school. Title IX assaults and harassment investigations will be engaged. Anti-bullying measures will be taken, and expand access to mental health resources in our schools. I'll double the number of school psychologists and guidance counselors and nurses and social workers. I'm going to protect and build on the Affordable Care Act by further expanding access to mental health care and enforcing mental health parity. I'm going to direct the Department of Justice to actually prosecute many of these hate crimes. And look, one of the things we have to make clear, and we started it in a foundation, I can no longer run the Biden Foundation, and I no longer can do that and raise money for it all. But what we started was, we started a thing that required to try to make clear to everyone why parents should be accepting of their children across the board, to basically begin to educate parents, educate communities, educate everyone, folks at the YMCA, to the YWCA, Boys and Girls Clubs, et cetera, that we should be embracing these children like every other child in our society. And a lot of work has to be done. I don't have to tell you, you'd be able to tell me better than anyone, on all of your listeners who are part of the community can tell me, but I can only imagine. I can only imagine what it is to realize your identity and all of a sudden say, can I say something? Can I say something? It's just wrong.
Well, it is wrong. And Vice President, I want to just thank you for your time. I just have one additional point that I want you to comment on.
Sure.
We close tonight. It appears for many of us, adults and children alike, that we're living in an alternative universe. And Donald Trump calls himself a friend of the LGBTQ community, but those words are frankly divorced from any sense of reality. His actions speak louder than words, and Donald Trump's record on LGBTQ issues is abysmal. You've mentioned he's opposed the Equality Act. He's proposed license to discriminate for adoption and foster care agencies. He's banned transgender troops from serving in the military, or at least is trying to. His policies have hurt the entire LGBTQ community, including women, immigrants, people of color, religious minorities, and many more. So can we just talk about a little bit about how we combat Trump's hypocrisy when he does nothing but lie to voters? What is your approach? How do you propose that we actually address his hypocrisy head on?
Well, look, Trump tries to pretend he supports this community just because he doesn't say the most offensive things outright, but he does the most offensive things. But it's with a wink and a nod. His actions speak so much louder than words. From revoking healthcare coverage protections, for banning transgender service members, if you mentioned, from the military, turning a blind eye to bullying and discrimination of kids at school. His administration is gutting your rights. We don't need any more parallel realities. We need a president who says what he means and does what he says. And look, as president, I'm going to stand up to the hatred and bigotry in all forms and make sure that our actions speak for themselves. I got involved in politics, and for one overarching reason, because I cannot stand the abuse of power. And this is the abuse of power. The ultimate abuse of power is for someone to discriminate against someone else based on any number of things. You know, we're going to pass the Equality Act and sign it into law. We're going to restore the provisions to protect LGBTQ youth. You know, when I was out campaigning and I talk about this and talk about parents who just essentially abandon their kids when they find out that they're trans, or if they're lesbian or gay or queer, people look like, and you can see their heads. They look like, really? And then you talk about how often it happens. And you start to ask them, and I have this colloquy. I say, what would you do if your child came home and told you, et cetera? And you can watch them go through the process of trying to figure out. I say, do you think, you know, I can remember I was taking a train. You know, I commuted every day for years and years as a U.S. Senator. And we were in a fight about whether or not we were going to allow openly gay people. It was the don't ask, don't tell, you know, portion of the military. And I got in the train one night coming home, and the guy who ran, it was a late train. I usually got the earlier train. And it was, I think, the 8:30 train. And there was, I think it was called the Romaner. And the guy who ran the club car, not the club car, the dining car. There wasn't anybody. It was late. It was a Wednesday night. And I sat down. I ordered some coffee, and I think, I don't know what I got, something to eat. And he came and sat down to me, and he said, you know, Joe, he said, you know, I'm gay. I said, I didn't know that. He said, yeah, I'm gay. And he said, you know what bugs me? He said, it's like, you know, I said one day, you know what? Wouldn't I be happier and more accepted? And wouldn't I be more loved if I was gay? Why don't I decide to be gay? That's what I want to do. Like, I stood up one day and said, this is what I'm going to do. He said, you know, people don't understand that who we are and choices we make. And we make a number of choices. But the idea that somehow we've decided to take the hard road to life is going to be easier being LGBTQ in society. And so that's why we're going to push this. Look, we have to reclaim our nation's role as a global leader on LGBTQ issues. And my administration is going to reflect and include this community at the table in every decision I make. You know, Barack and I had well over 300 LGBTQ members who were held high positions in our administration. which is larger percentage-wise than the population. But the point is, my administration is going to look like the rest of America across the board, based on race, gender identity, across the board. Because that's the strongest message, I think, we can send to people who are finding themselves on the other end of this discrimination. That look at so-and-so, the secretary of such and such. Look at so-and-so, the ambassador to. Look at so-and-so, et cetera. It matters. I think it matters a lot. And it's going to reflect the country and what the country looks like, including the courts.
Mr. Vice President, thank you. Thank you for your time. Let me say again that over the next 180 days, we're going to do all that we can to help elect you president. To those watching tonight, I encourage you to get involved. We cannot do this without you. I would like to share a few ways in which you can help elect Joe Biden president and make sure that we elect pro-equality candidates across this nation. We know that one-on-one conversations are the most effective ways of moving people into action. That is why the Human Rights Campaign has created a few opportunities for you to do so safely from your home. From now through Election Day, we have launched our TEAM app. TEAM is an advocacy app that will help you engage with your friends and your families in conversations about the election and pro-equality candidates. So please join by downloading our TEAM app. You can find it at go.jointeam.com/HRC. Beyond reaching out to our own contacts, we also need to inform pro-equality voters about safe voting options in states that will help decide this election. You heard us talk about how difficult it is for certain communities to vote. Our goal is to have thousands of conversations with these voters as soon as possible. To sign up to make these calls in battleground states, please go to hrc.im/swing-state-squad. And then finally, your support as a member of the Human Rights Campaign makes this work possible. Becoming a member only costs $5. It only costs $5. You can make a donation or order an HRC Vote Biden t-shirt on our website, www.hrc.org. So please join us and help us make history this November by defeating Donald Trump, by seizing back our democracy, and electing Joe Biden as our next president. Thank you very much for joining us, Vice President. Thank you very much for joining us as well.
Thank you. I'm honored to have your endorsement. I really am. Thank you.